For over 150 years, trade between Europe and Asia has relied on passage through the Suez Canal in Egypt. But recently, a new project's been launched that aims to transform trade routes, making the primary hub no longer Egypt, but Iraq. Iraq's bold plans to build what some have called a new Silk Road, a modernized network of roads and railways that will stretch from the Persian Gulf through Baghdad, Turkey, and Europe. The project will cost $17 billion and involves building one of the largest ports on Earth. However, the Iraqi Prime Minister and the President of Turkey seem to agree this project is more than worth the investment, posing the chance to completely transform the entire region. Today, Looking For takes you to the Middle East to discover this new Iraqi corridor, which could well redraw the map of trade routes. To understand why competing with the Suez Canal is so bold, one has to recognize the enormous significance of the Suez Canal itself. Since it was first opened in 1869, the Suez Canal's had an impact on Egypt that's hard to overstate. Linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean made it so the fastest maritime route from Asia to Europe was through Egypt. This has benefited the country in a lot more ways than just a wealth of tolls to collect. Over the decades, entire new cities have appeared. In 1956, Egyptian president announced the nationalization of the canal, a decision that would lead to war a few months later. The Suez Canal crisis. Despite this, Egypt's geopolitical status continued to soar to new heights in the latter half of the 20th century. It's obvious enough why owning an integral part of one of the world's most valuable trade routes can completely transform a nation. And it's therefore obvious enough why other nations in the Middle East have something of a complex relationship with the canal. Many nations, from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Iraq, also use the canal. Iraq even directly supported Egypt's efforts to nationalize it in 1956. However, while simultaneously supporting the canal, these nations have also made various side efforts to become less reliant on it. For example, in the 1980s, Saudi Arabia built the East-West Pipeline, also known as the Petrol Line, a 746-mile pair of oil pipelines stretching across the Arabian Peninsula. The Middle East has broadly benefited from the nationalization of the Suez Canal, but those benefits have been far from evenly distributed. Trade improved for virtually everyone, but Egypt saw huge direct revenue, increased foreign investment, and major infrastructure development. Other nations have seen benefits that are much milder and more indirect. For example, the port of Aqaba in Jordan handles nearly 900,000 containers a year thanks to its proximity to the canal. Various Middle Eastern nations have been quietly discussing the idea of bypassing the canal for decades, but until recently, no one had ever announced a comprehensive, actionable plan to make this daring vision a reality. Then, in April 2023, that all changed. That month, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan visited Baghdad, where he signed an agreement with Iraqi officials. The agreement was to boost economic ties, consider Iraq's need for water access, and one more thing, develop a new trade corridor. A month later, the details of this new trade corridor were unveiled. To the amazement of the international press, it turned out to be perhaps the boldest trade infrastructure plan announced anywhere in the Middle East since 1869. Together, Turkey and Iraq were going to build roads and railways from the Persian Gulf all the way into Europe. The network would stretch from the oil-rich south of Iraq all the way through the country and across the Turkish border, where it would then connect with existing European networks. A project with colossal stakes, since this new, modern trade route would enable shipping companies to free themselves from the exorbitant tolls of the Suez Canal. In 2022, these tolls amounted to $500,000 for the largest container ships. Currently, if you want to cover the distance from the Iraqi port town of Al-Faw to Baghdad, let alone Turkey and beyond, you have essentially one option. Drive on one freeway, built by Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, called, fittingly, Freeway 1. Sections of this old and ill-equipped freeway are still single carriageway, meaning there's no center divider between oncoming traffic. Although the freeway does pass through Baghdad, most of the more than 1,000-kilometer drive across Iraq is through remote territory. Only a handful of hotels exist along the route, and there are so few service stations as to make traveling by gas-powered vehicle logistically difficult. While sections of this lone freeway are depended on by numerous local Iraqis, mostly for shorter journeys, very little international trade passes along it, for obvious reasons. Iraq does also have an existing train system, but it's notoriously slow. Freighting oil or traveling overnight on the system's one-passenger train can take up to 12 hours to reach Baghdad from Basra, an average speed of less than 30 miles per hour. This has frustrated Iraqi leaders for decades, because if you look on the map, the route could be, and in their view should be, the straightest, fastest, best route from the Persian Gulf to Europe. That best route, in May 2023, is exactly what Turkey and Iraq announced their intention to build. The whole project starts at the beginning of the new trade route, at the southern tip of the Al-Faw Peninsula. Back in 2010, Iraq launched a project to turn this into the biggest port in the Middle East. Phase 1 was scheduled to be completed in 2019, but has since been pushed back to 2025. However, significant progress has still been made. In 2020, the Guinness Book of World Records certified the port's new breakwaters as the largest on Earth. Builders have also completed basic infrastructure such as docks, berths, and quays, with a total handling capacity of nearly 100 million tons of various cargo and a price tag that's already close to $5 billion. The Grand Fow port, as it's to be called, will be the gateway to Europe for this new trade route. Beyond the port, the first major item on the list is the creation of an entirely new freeway system. Unlike Freeway 1, the new freeway will have as many as 6 lanes, separated, of course, by a center divider. This will include a main multi-lane airport highway in Baghdad. The freeway will feature comprehensive signage, modern lighting systems, and surveillance systems such as speed cameras. The new freeway will also be much more equipped with amenities, numerous service stations, rest areas, hotels, restaurants, and so on, making long-distance travel much more feasible. Though a major development, the new freeway will pale in comparison to the new rail system built alongside it. The 2-track system will run parallel to the freeway, passing through the same locations. The freight train is initially projected to have an annual carrying capacity of 3.5 million containers, carrying 22 million tons of cargo. This is a far cry from the Suez Canal's annual load of over 500 million tons. But there's no doubt that this new rail link will eat into the canal's benefits, offering a faster alternative to the conventional route. Meanwhile, the adjacent passenger train aims to revolutionize Iraqi train travel, treating passengers to currently unavailable luxuries like onboard Wi-Fi and high-end dining services. But most importantly, the new train will be faster, a lot faster. The new travel time from Basra to Baghdad will be 2 hours instead of 12. Iraq will be scrapping its 30-mile-an-hour train for one that goes 186, as fast as France's high-speed trains. If successful, this will be the largest single explosion in train speed any nation's ever witnessed. Due to travel limitations and economic hardship, a significant number of Iraqi citizens have never left the country or flown on a plane. Most instead travel by bus, by slow train, or on roadways that are not always well maintained. Shooting nearly 200 miles an hour across the nation will be an awesome transformation for millions of Iraqi citizens projected to use the service. In fact, the passenger train's projected to carry 13 million passengers per year. Needless to say, this is a huge project, one that will play out over not just years, but decades. Construction of the corridor scheduled to take place in 3 phases, with completion by 2050. On April 22, 2024, during a visit by the Turkish President to Baghdad, a cooperation agreement for the Development Road project was signed between Iraq, Turkey, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, with the bulk of the funding coming from Doha and Abu Dhabi. This partnership is a huge leg up, but Iraq still faces several formidable obstacles along their new Silk Road. Chief among these is the issue of corruption. Thanks in no small part to many years of sanctions and conflict, corruption among both public and private sectors is a reality. Effectively and transparently allocating $17 billion for a multi-phase infrastructure project would be a real challenge. And even if the country manages to overcome this difficulty, it'll have to overcome another problem: competition. Iraq is the underdog in a 3-player race to create a new Silk Road. Both China and India are working on their own similar projects to create a new trade corridor between Asia and Europe. Both proposed routes bypass Iraq. Worse still, India's proposed corridor would run through both Saudi Arabia and the UAE on its way past, further boosting already well-off neighbors while leaving Iraq in the dust. To compete with the Suez Canal, the new Iraqi corridor will have to be built in spite of corruption and ahead of other nations seeking to steal the same opportunity. That said, sending 13 million passengers and 22 million tons of goods each year across the war-torn country could very well flip the script, offering Iraq a path to joining the shimmering ranks of Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates as one of the wealthiest nations in the Middle East. If they could pull it off, Iraq will see 100,000 new jobs and $4 billion a year. No small boost to a GDP that was just under $265 billion in 2022. It's a long road, both literally and figuratively, but it's far from impossible. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to subscribe for more content like this in the future. That's all for now. I'll see you next time on Looking For.